Flown versus ground stacked. Which one is right? Well, it depends on your show and what you're trying to accomplish, but we're going to pick apart the underlying principles that make each of them work. We're going to do some calculations in my audio math survival spreadsheet, which you can get at the link below, produced by mkc.com/audio toolkit. There's a bunch of other great stuff in there. You can steal a lot of my cheat codes for everything that I use on site and in planning shows. But let's pick apart flown versus ground stack PAs. Okay, so let's begin with the end in mind. What are the 5 checkboxes that I've got to check before I sign off on a system? Show scope always changes on site, and some things are outside of your control. You thought you were going to be able to fly, now you can't, or they're going to put a camera where you're going to put your left PA. So you always have to be flexible. But being able to grade the efficacy of a system based on these 5 will really help you in the field. So first is SPL management. Can the system itself get loud enough to handle the metal show I'm asking it to do? Or do you need something smaller and can save some money if I'm just doing a corporate gathering? Also, is the SPL even throughout the audience? I don't want it slamming in the front and a whisper in the back. Second is even coverage. Are the speakers that I'm speccing adequately able to cover and therefore provide even LF to HF uniformity across the audience, so I have intelligibility and it sounds natural anywhere I'm at in the audience. And third is tonal uniformity. Just because I have a speaker that can maybe cover the area, is it pointed in such a way that I'm going to get a even or at least gradient of evenness throughout my audience of tonal uniformity. I don't want a huge amount of low end in some spots and it's missing in others, or weird mid-range peaks because I decided to do weird gain shading in the PA. So tonal uniformity is a big one for me. Fourth is intuitive imaging. So if I'm an audience member, no matter where I'm standing, does the sound from the show, the concert, the presentation sound like it's actually coming from the stage or the visual element I'm supposed to be looking at? You know, Apple has the thing now where it tracks your head and you can actually feel like you know where your phone is around you based on the head tracking. So is the same thing at the show. If I'm looking at the stage, does the sound like it's coming from the stage? And then lastly is musical voicing. So is the PA fun to listen to? Is it responsive to mix engineers that are on it? And do they enjoy mixing on it? So I should be able to pump up the reference tracks that I love using, and it should be like, yeah, okay, this sounds great. I love it. Okay. So we need to get data ahead of time from the venues we're going to be in, or where our audience is going to be able to make informed decisions about where we put our speakers. So the room shape and the audience shape gives us the target that we're shooting for. And then we work backwards and able to match the speaker shape to that. So I know this is a lot of groundwork to get to flown versus ground stack, but we'll get there, I promise. So here are some speaker principles to keep in mind. So a speaker is going to be loudest at the center of its throw. So if I got a speaker facing you like this, I'll make it a 90-degree speaker. Right here on axis is the 0 dB point. And then when I get 45 degrees off this way, that's half of the 90, right? That's going to be 6 dB down from that. And so we have this smooth transition of more or less 1 or 2K and up falling off by 6 dB, because that's what we're able to steer mechanically. Frequencies below that are really subject to either the line array's length, or if it's just a single speaker, it's going to be moving a lot omnidirectionally. But you just keep those things in mind, that the speaker is going to be loudest at the front and at the edges of its coverage, 6 dB down in the high frequencies. And then secondly is the names are going to be used to be talking about the audience. So if I've got just a normal shoebox audience, what I'm going to call very bottom, and this is all stolen from Bob McCarthy in his book, so just get that. Very bottom is front and center in the row, in the audience. And then very top is front and center in the back. And then we have off axis left. So this is mirroring a speaker. So it's the middle of the audience, but the left, and then off axis right, and that's middle of the audience, but the far right. And then lastly, we have on ax, and that usually either talks about the middle of your audience, or it's talking about the center of your speaker's throw as it's hitting a point in the audience. But the first 4 is what we're going to really be talking about today, is that's defining some reference points to make sure we can check that is our ground PA covering that, is our flown PA covering that. So we got very bottom, very top, off-axis left, off-axis right. It's just making a compass. So adding the Z-axis means that our speaker is going to change in how it covers throughout the audience based on its height. So we're going to open up a recent design I did for a church here in town and compare and contrast what a ground stack system here will look like versus flown. All right, I've got our design files here. We're going to be working in Map 3D as well as Ease Focus 3. This is for an install project I'm working on right now for a local church, so you get to see some real world stuff which is going on. And with any PA design, you have the decision to go flown or ground stack. So in this real world situation, we're going to assess those two options. And so I think we're going to go with a QSC or RCF product at the end of the day. So that would be done in Ease Focus 3, but I like looking at a mirror of the design in Map just because you can see it in 3D, which is a lot of fun. So I picked equivalent speakers to what I spec. So this is an 80 by 50 degree speakers here, and this is a 90 by 60. So we're not worrying about subs today, but can our mains work best flown or ground stacked? So we can see here on viewport 4, a side view, and we have this guy right here at 7 feet in the air, and that's about how high you can get a speaker on a stand if you raise it all the way up. Our audience is at standing height, so 5.5 feet. And then I have this speaker, which is our main, at 18.5 foot trim. So here's a picture of the space. It's being built right now, but you can see from the back. Down center, the stage wasn't built there yet, but I now know it's 15 by 17, but about half of it's going to be recessed and about half of it's going to come out to the room. Then we have these side walls that we could mount speakers to, but the venue itself slopes up to a high A, which is really nice. So I can get a speaker nice and high, which is going to come to our advantage here in a little bit. Okay, so the biggest difference between a flown and ground stack speaker is, you guessed it, height, the Z-axis. I can get one in the air. So how does this help us? So we're going to assess the range ratio of these two speakers. And what I mean by that is, how far is the box throwing from itself to the back row versus the box to the front row. That's how we get a range ratio. So I'm just measuring in pixels today. The distance tool isn't working right for me here in Map, but this is 2352 pixels. So I'm going to put that here on my linear change to dB change spreadsheet. That was, 2352. And then from this center of the box, the tweeter is what I usually measure from, 788. All right. So as a 9.5 dB change, or it is 34% of it. So that gives me a range ratio. We can even reverse these. Yeah, so it's basically a 3x difference. Okay, so it's a good idea on any design to point your speaker at the back row if the range ratio is more than 2:1. So we can get to that in another video, but just a little tidbit for you there. So that's why it's pointed directly at the head of the person standing in the back row. So this is a 3x problem I need to solve. But the good thing is we already established that our speakers on axis are twice as loud as the edge of it. And so if the on axis is pointed directly at our audience at the back, and then the edges, which are already down in volume, are coming down to the front, that helps right now offset what's going on here. Okay, so now let's measure our distance ratio if I were going to do the front box to the first row, which is 481 pixels. And then from here to the back, all the way here to the back row, is 2267. So it's actually a really similar throw distance, even with us flying it to that back row. And so this is a almost 5x problem to deal with. So it's a 13.5 dB increase. So it's about 4 dB more we have to adjust for from front to back. So when I'm designing, and half of this is all Bob McCarthy, so just read his book, but I like to keep a less than 6 dB variance from front to back. And right now, just the distances themselves make that hard, but this is going to be really hard with this front box. So I'm going to make this disappear. Let's go look at our coverage and our weather map of this 80 degree wide by 50 degree vertical box. So we have this box on the ground here. We're going to hit predict at 4K. So as you can see, it's super loud in the front, and then it's not so loud in the back. So I stored measurements of our front microphones. So let's go to ground rear. Look at that. So I can see here that we have from 8K to 2K is usually what I'm really concerned about from SPL perspective. So if I take these and drag it all the way over to the side here, I can see this is more or less coming from 86 dB up to 100. So that is showing me pretty darn close to our 13.5 dB problem, or measurements are saying it's a 14 dB problem. So even worse. So this system definitely fails when looking at our 5 criteria of SPL management. We are not having an even front to back. We are, however, having a very even tonal balance. It's very even tonally. So that if I had to say a good thing about it, it's doing it there. It's with its 80 degree spread able to get out to the majority of the audience, but I am a little bit concerned about these gaps right here. Okay, so now let's pull up our flown PA, assess coverage. And no red, and red isn't bad. It's just if we have red and blue, that means there's a big discrepancy. And so as expected, we have it louder in the middle. It's going to fall off towards the edges. And I have right off the bat, less of an area I have to worry about. That's not as quite as much volume as the center in the back. So let's compare our measurements here. I'm going to pull up 4 of these now. So I will note the flown rear and the ground rear are almost identical. So it's the same volume in the back. So by flying it, we are not losing anything in the back. But what it's done has lessened it in the rear. So this is flown front and flown rear. Let's check out the difference in volume here. So we're definitely getting some pink shift as things are falling off at the back, which is expected. But we have 8K to 2K, and that is definitely less than a 6 dB spread. So that's a win in my book. So 6 dB front to back is what I'm shooting for, and our 2K to 8K range definitely falls within that. So I'm super happy with that. So what we've just proved here is that although we're losing more SPL overall, since we're not as close, the exact same speaker, I'm able to lessen, and what was a 13.5 dB problem, I made it a 6 dB problem. So it's less than twice the volume front to back. So this is a big win in my book. It doesn't look like we're going to need front fills right in front of the stage because the first row is right here. And this looks like it has plenty of gas. The only thing we might think about is having some side fills right here for these very corners. But it really depends on where they end up putting the chairs in the space, because if they put their front row, right here, they might end up fanning things out and putting it around the sides of the stage. So anyway, so that's just a conversation with them, asking where they really are going to put their chairs and if we're going to need speakers like that. But we all know that a single center speaker right in front of the stage isn't going to work logistically anyway. I was just using this similar placement to compare measurements. So let's look at what a stereo ground stack rig is going to look like here in ease. So I've got a ground house left, house right, and let's look at the mapping here. So they're each pointing through the middle of their zones. It's good to subdivide coverage. So right here, it's pointed through. Right here, it's pointed through. So from a horizontal coverage standpoint, it's doing a good job. So we've got our stereo mapping done, and I want to mention a difference that we're seeing from a level perspective. So in our map 3D example, we saw with the speaker directly in the middle, it was a 13.5 dB problem front to back, because that speaker was right in front of the person in the center and having to go to the center in the back. But here with our stereo setup, since we have these edges, is what's going here to this first row. So even though it's getting 2 of the speakers, it merely having the edges of the coverage doesn't make it quite so bad front and center. But this person in the middle is still going to get blasted here. So we're going to still have that problem right here for the people right in front of each of the speakers, but the middle of the middle, even though that's where we usually start our design decisions, we have to take into account our full audience. So front to back, we can look at our frequency response at mid depth and show tonal uniformity is actually really nice because we're not having to deal with different off-axis elements of the speaker, but we have a range here of what looks like those are all tracing within 102 to 97, so 5 or 6 dB, so which isn't too bad. But if we put a receiver here right in front of at the first row, let's see what happens there. Yeah, so this guy is way hotter. And so we have to be cognizant of the measurement positions we use and know that a speaker is going to be on center a lot hotter than it is. So what looked like, oh yeah, we're fine, I'm measuring at the middle of the room, but if we take into account the entire thing, this is from our middle at the back center to the middle of the front row at one of the other speakers is a much bigger discrepancy. So that looks like 97 to 108. So that's 11 dB problem here in Ease Focus 3. So all that is leading me to say that I can get things done better with a flown speaker rather than a ground stacked system. Again, you got to do what you got to do. If you can't fly, you should be aware of these problems. And so if someone has a hearing aid, probably don't put them here at receiver number 5, put them in the back. But we have even tonal uniformity. The sound sounds like it's coming from the stage, but our SPL distribution is 11 dB, or basically a 3.5x problem we have to deal with front to back. Okay, so let's land this plane and do a final pros and cons of ground stack versus flown. All right, ground stack. Here's some pros. You can get it really loud if you need to. So some people really want to have their concert cranked, put them in the front row, right in front of it. Don't have to worry too much about tonal uniformity, and it's going to blow them away. But again, the people in the back, maybe they don't want to, they're at a dinner and you have a dance floor right in front of this nonprofit thing, and then there are tables in the back where people just want to chat. So you might be okay with really focusing on your speakers on that dance floor and not have to worry about the back, unless there's also a gala, awards presentation. Then you have to have the same PA, make it bump on the dance floor and intelligible for everyone in the room. So that's for up you to decide. Would you rather have more SPL for the dance floor or better coverage out in the room? So those are the kind of the real world ways to kind of untangle what you should do with the PA. So the other pro, it's faster setup and there's no rigging. Just put on a speaker stand and away you go. So you don't have to worry about points you have to hang from or those logistics. So the cons for ground stack is, again, a high level variance front to back, especially have an audience on the front row that's very close to the stage and in a pretty deep room. It's going to be a big discrepancy front to rear. The sight lines from the screens or any other visual element off to the side, having a speaker right there next to the stage makes it hard to see those elements. That's also true with the flown PA if you have really high visual elements, but it's usually lifted up out of the way. It also can block paths or entrance points to the stage, since it's pretty common to put speakers right to the left and right of the stage. That can get in your way. It's also really hard to make a linearized speaker that you end up having a ground stack sound great on the ground because you have to have the box angles so tight. And so that's going to really further the problem of having it being super loud in the front and not as loud in the back because of the way you have to do those box angles. And so basically never put everything at 0 and just blast away. Okay, so here are the pros for flown. So by reducing the front to back range ratio, you're able to get a much more even SPL variance from front to back. So we were to take it from a 13.5 dB problem to a less than 6 dB problem, which is a big win in my book. You could theoretically use less speakers. We still had the same 90 by 60 speaker, given enough height for it to kind of fan out and cover the room. It really does a good job of covering the entire thing. We just have to make sure we spec a beefy enough thing so it can get loud to carry the whole band from one point source. It helps keep stage areas clean since everything's in the air, which is a big win in my book. And it looks cool. I think having a big PA in the air is a lot of fun. So the cons for Flown, before we think this is the ultimate solution to every sound problem ever, is you can lose low end impact in front rows if you're flying your subs too. So sub arrays, you can steer those and point them at your audience, but people up front really probably want it to bump and to fill it in your chest. So you might have to do a distributed or fill subsystem. It takes more budget and time to fly speakers. You have to be, is the venue even capable of handling that much weight? Does your show budget, can you afford rigging? Do you have enough time to do that and get up in the air? So you really have to have a well-oiled machine to get stuff up in the air quickly. Flown speakers, like I said, can still block sight lines. You just have to know how they're going to. So it's great to have a software like Vectorworks to look in advance and see all three departments on top of each other to see what's going on. All right, there it was, Flown versus ground stacked, everything you need to know. Bottom line, reduce that range ratio so you can make more even SPL coverage front to back. That's what we talked about. My name is Michael. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.